We're guilty of this. We put up a front and we put up a barrier between us and the public, and
Mhm.
all they see is this polished uniform, or they hear the voice on the other side of the 911 call. But they don't really understand that we're parents, we're spouses, we're brothers, we're sisters, and not only do we have the same personal issues that they do, but we also have to deal with people on the worst days of their lives.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of 911 Delta Tethered for Life podcast. As usual, this episode may not be suitable for all listeners due to language and content, so listen with care and stay safe out there.
Hey y'all, welcome to today's episode of 911 Delta Tethered for Life podcast. We're your hosts, Casey and Anna. Today we have a special guest, Michael Sugrue. Michael is a retired police officer whose life was irrevocably changed after a fatal officer-involved shooting. Following this traumatic event, Michael faced the harrowing effects of PTSD. However, instead of letting this define him, he has transformed his experience into a powerful message of hope and resilience. Now a public speaker, Michael dedicates his time to raising awareness about mental health and the challenges first responders face. Join us as we dive into his journey, the lessons he's learned, and his mission to support others through their darkest times. Now grab those headsets, let's talk.
Welcome, Michael. We're so excited to have you. Thank you for joining us. We know you've co-authored a best-selling book called Relentless Courage. So can you tell us a little bit about that and your story behind it?
Absolutely. So I'm a both military veteran and law enforcement veteran. I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I medically retired in 2018 for what I call post-traumatic stress injury versus disorder. Now, the book is something that I never envisioned, I never planned, but I think everything happens truly for a reason. And so if we go back to right before COVID happened, my co-author, Dr. Shauna Springer, she's a clinical psychologist who's worked with hundreds and hundreds of combat veterans and first responders. She had already authored 3 books. I didn't know her, she didn't know me, but she actually reached out to me on LinkedIn and just wanted to set up a phone call to kind of intro ourselves and find out what each other are doing in the mental health realm. And during that conversation, Doc Springer, after I told her my story, which is in the book, she actually asked me if I thought about authoring a book. And I actually said, well, I've briefly thought about it, and I've been asked this before. I said, but honestly, with post traumatic stress, I don't have the focus, the concentration, even the drive that I once had. And I don't think I could get something like that done. So we left the conversation at that. And a couple weeks later, she called me back and she was like, look, Michael, she's like, I can't stop thinking about your story. She's like, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of trauma stories in my work as a clinical psychologist, but your story is going to save countless lives. And she said, I want to do this book with you. And without even meeting her in person, I actually agreed to do this project with her. And we, for the first year, had to do everything via Zoom because of COVID.
Mhm.
And we released the book in April of 2022, the actual hard copy version. The Audible version didn't come out to this past July. And the book it's very unique. I don't know of any other book like it. And what makes it so unique is that every chapter is split into 2 parts. The first part of every chapter is my story, going all the way back to childhood until present day. It's told in my voice. And then the second half of every chapter, Doc Springer comes in. She breaks everything down. She explains it. She validates and shows the true human side behind the badge and behind the uniform, and shows the toll that it takes not only on us, but on our family members, our loved ones. And together we show a pathway to healing on how you can actually overcome post traumatic stress injury. And really, the book's exploded. International bestseller, both in Canada, United States, bestseller for over 34 weeks. And it's literally it's saving relationships, it's saving careers, but most importantly, it's saving lives. And that's my mission. That's why I'm here today, because I'm living proof to show people that no matter how bad it gets, no matter how dark it gets, because I was there, I was the point where I was suicidal and I was purposely trying to get killed in the line of duty. but I've overcome that and I'm living a whole new life now. And that's what I'm here to talk about today.
Yes, it's an amazing story. Very powerful story.
It is. And I love the way that you did the book, because I think the doc's insights are so helpful to people who aren't in the field, um, because I feel like a lot of times they're just like, oh yeah, it's just the officer, or the combat vet, or the dispatcher, whoever is telling the story, and you're telling it from your perspective, and the layperson doesn't even really know our perspective, and then I don't think they get the point. But I thought the way that she did it, and the way that she introduced her perspective, and then how that would make somebody like you feel, was really a unique part of the book, and really made it very easy for the layperson to also understand, and not just be a public safety or a military person.
Absolutely. And it's, the book is not just for military or law enforcement or first responders. Like you said, it's for anybody on the street. And, the main purpose of the book obviously was to help first responders and veterans, but it's actually also helping to bridge the gap between first responders and the communities they serve. Because as you know, we've had a divide in the last few years. I mean, really, the last few decades, but it's gotten worse over the last few years. And this book has the power to help change that because, like you said, it gives real insight to people that never really understood us or understood what we do and the effects on us. Because, we're guilty of this. We put up a front and we put up a barrier between us and the public, and all they see is this polished uniform, or they hear the voice on the other side of the 911 call, but they don't really understand that we're parents. We're spouses, we're brothers, we're sisters, and not only do we have the same personal issues that they do, but we also have to deal with people on the worst days of their lives.
Yes. And I have to tell you, when I was listening to your book, and of course we have lots of friends that are law enforcement officers, but I was thinking to myself, why would anyone want to be a Leo today? Just with what you had to go through, having to go to court and be treated that way in the media and all of that. Why would anybody want to do that today? Um and how do you think that your department or departments in the future could have better handled your case after the officer involved shooting?
So I think, given the experience that my department had at the time with the shooting itself, there hadn't been another officer involved shooting the entire time I'd been there at that agency at that time. And I think the previous one happened like 12 or 14 years earlier. I wasn't there at that time. And so a lot of our staff actually never had firsthand experience with a shooting. So I think with the shooting itself, they did well considering that. Where the real issues came into play was years later, after I got sued and after going through actually federal court 4 years later. And when I got to my breaking point of finally asking for help, initially my department was very receptive. They were getting me the resources I needed, but then it wasn't fast enough. It wasn't quick enough. And that's where my blue family really turned their back on me and they abandoned me and put me out on an island. And in my humble opinion, I think this abandonment, what I call institutional betrayal or administrative betrayal, is the number one thing that is leading to suicide among our first responders. The horrific things that we see and deal with, they take a toll. Don't get me wrong, and we have to address that. We have to deal with that. But when our heroes reach out for help, we need to embrace them. We need to wrap our arms around them and give them the time and the resources they need to get better and to come back. Because for me, law enforcement was a calling for me. It wasn't just a job. It's something that I knew since I was 8 years old. This is what I wanted to do. And even when I was off trying to get better, I never even once thought about retiring until they brought the subject up and almost made it like, hey, if you agree to retire now, we'll make this kind of easy and painless. And I was like, well, no, I don't want to retire. Thank you for offering that, but my goal is to come back. I'm getting better. I'm making progress. And I was so excited. I told my administrator all the things I was doing, and I was making real progress. But that, like I said, that wasn't fast enough. And that's where this betrayal came in. And it got so bad, it got to the point where I had no choice. I was like, I have to retire. I can't do this job anymore. And so, the way our agencies can do better is they have to support us at all levels. And that comes down to, like you just said, why would anybody want to do this job now? And all law enforcement agencies across the nation are in a staffing crisis. Every department is understaffed.
Yeah.
And I think the people that are still doing it are ones like me who feel it's a calling. They have a higher purpose. They want to make a difference. And you know what? We're willing to go out there every single day and put our lives on the lines for complete strangers. But we need support. We need the community support. We need our local government, our state government, our county government. And most importantly, we need our agency chiefs to have our back when we need it most.
Indeed. Now, Michael, Anna and I know your story, but for our listeners that don't know your story, give them a brief overview of the events, the incident that brought you to where you are right now.
Absolutely. So prior to joining civilian law enforcement, I served 6.5 years in the United States Air Force as a commissioned officer. I was in security forces, which is basically anti-terrorism, force protection, air-based ground defense, nuclear security, foreign airfield assessments. I served in the Middle East, South America, Europe, all over the United States. I got out in 2004 as a captain, went into the civilian law enforcement here in the San Francisco Bay Area for the Walnut Creek Police Department. I was an officer. I was a field training officer, detective. I was undercover 2 years on the state drug task force. And about 8 years on, I was promoted to patrol sergeant. And that's really where this story kind of begins, because as a brand new patrol sergeant, I was my second solo shift. The shift started the night after Christmas, 2012. I was involved in a horrific, fatal shooting where basically, and again, I go into much more detail in the book, but the short story is that a subject broke into a condominium, had a huge butcher knife, kitchen knife, and was trying to stab through a bedroom door to get to a couple that was literally physically barricading their bodies, trying to prevent him from coming in. I was first on scene with another female officer. At that time, we only had one single dispatcher on duty, and myself and this other officer ran towards these horrific screams. We got there, announced ourselves. There was no answer, no movement, no noise. We go inside. Eventually, we're at the bottom of a stairwell, and an armed subject with that knife then diverted his attention towards us, giving multiple commands to drop the knife. No reaction. I mean, literally, he's like something out of a zombie movie, sweating profusely, eyes wide open, just staring straight through us. And eventually, he raised the knife up over his head in the stabbing position, started coming towards us. I shot, other officers shot. At the time, I didn't know if I'd hit him at that point. He's now at the bottom of the stairs. Two of the officers retreated to another room. Myself and another officer were literally just like 3 feet away from the subject, still armed with this huge knife. And he was between us and the couple upstairs. We didn't know if they're bleeding out, if they were dying, already dead, but we had to get to them. And so we're giving commands again, drop the knife, drop the knife. He starts coming back up with a knife. I shot, my partner shot, and I mean, it was devastating. He was killed instantly. Thank God we got there when we did, because literally that bedroom door was coming off the hinges. And I know today, had we not gotten there, that couple would not be alive. But the issue is that I call that incident my tipping point. And I think what most lay people don't understand, that is first responders, so paramedics, dispatchers, firefighters, police officers, we're exposed to hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents over our careers. And so up to that point, 6.5 years in the military, 8 years in civilian law enforcement, I've been exposed to hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents. some of which I talk about in detail in the book.
Mhm.
But the thing was, I never talked about it. I never processed it. I let everything bottle up inside because I thought, you know what, this doesn't bother me. I'm just going to detach myself. None of this stuff is ever going to affect me. And little did I know, each incident was slowly stacking up inside of me. And I equate it to kind of like a jar filling up. Throughout my career, my jar was filling up. And when this shooting happened, I literally lost my feeling of invincibility in a millisecond. Up to that point, I felt invincible. I mean, even my 2 years undercover, my time in the Middle East, South America, I thought nothing would ever touch me or harm me. But for whatever reason, I lost that feeling in that instant. And that was my tipping point. And it led to a downward spiral where, you know what, I didn't rely on the resources we had because I didn't trust in them.
Mhm.
I didn't have a healthy relationship with my wife at the time. I'm now divorced, but I made a lot of mistakes there, and there was nobody I felt I could turn to. And so I started drinking too much. I started isolating. I was having constant nightmares. I mean, literally this face of this person that tried to kill me, I couldn't get it out of my mind and my thoughts. And it got so bad, I literally suffered in silence for 4 years, lost my marriage, was fighting for custody of my daughter, repeated skin cancer diagnosis, which I know is related to stress. Things were going wrong at work. I mean, literally everything was going wrong. And it got so bad, like I said, I was purposely trying to get killed in the line of duty because I felt if that happened, I'd be remembered as a hero. You
Right.
know what? I'd go out as a hero. My daughter would be forever taken care of. She would never forget about me. She would know how much I loved her. And that's how bad it got.
That's such a powerful story, and we can relate, not so much as far as obviously we've never had something face to face like that, but the things that we've heard on the other end being dispatchers, it's, you do become numb. You do think, oh, it's the job, it's whatever. But now that, for me personally, that I'm not doing it after 16 years, all the calls that, at one point I thought were, not going to bother me, they are still to this day. Like, I think something triggers it. And so I can only imagine, how it must have been for you, seeing the visual. And I mean, I just can't imagine.
But
I want,
I want to stop you there because this is important, and I want to follow my own sword here because I was guilty of this, and you know what, I've owned up on this, and I'm ashamed of it, but it needs to be talked about, and especially on this show because you're both dispatchers. The show is geared towards dispatchers, and I was one of those ignorant young officers who had no idea the toll that this job takes on our first responders. And you mentioned not being able to see it, but what I've found out now through my recovery, my volunteer work that I do with dispatchers, other first responders, is that actually not seeing it and filling in the gaps in your mind and making those visual assumptions can be as worse, if not worse, for our dispatchers. And I really think we need to do a better job of supporting our dispatchers and caring for them. Because I'm going to tell you right now, that poor dispatcher in my shooting, there was a 4 hour period where she was on her own. The shooting's happening. She's fielding 911 calls. She's listening to the radio. She doesn't know if we've been shot. She doesn't know if we've been killed.
Mhm.
She's trying to call in medical. And you know what? She didn't get the support that she should have got. And she's no longer a dispatcher. And I feel so bad because even at that time, I had no idea the effect on this shooting because it affected her just as much as it affected me. That is a fact.
Mhm.
And so I'm here to say that, you know what? I was wrong. And many of our first responders who haven't been through it, who haven't experienced it, who haven't been working long enough, don't realize that the toll is just as heavy on our dispatchers. And that's why our
It
dispatchers
is.
are first responders, absolutely
Yes.
first responders. And so, again, I'm owning up on that because I was guilty of that. And I'm ashamed that I used to feel that way. But now, having gone through it and having
Right.
worked with so many dispatchers,
Mhm.
I can tell you that I get it. I understand it. And I advocate for you just as much as I advocate for our firefighters, our paramedics, our police officers, because we're all out there. We're all dealing
Yeah.
with the worst of the worst. And so I commend you both for what you've done, what you do, and I commend all the dispatchers out there listening to this right now.
Well, we definitely appreciate that. Now, you had mentioned that the dispatcher from the incident was included in the CISD meeting. Do you know if that dispatcher had any incident follow-up after that?
I don't know. That's the sad part about it is that, she was there for the debrief. But I'll be honest with you, even at that time, so we're talking the debrief happened, it would have been the very beginning of 2013 because the shooting happened the very end of 2012, and it was 2 weeks after the shooting. But I honestly got the impression, and I'm not going to name names, but from other people in that debriefing, including myself, was kind of like, why is this person here? It wasn't said. And again, I'm going to tell you right now, I live a life of honesty and transparency, okay? And so I honestly think that was part of the mindset at that time, and I was guilty of that. But I can also tell you that during that critical incident debrief, none of us talked about anything to do with trauma, the effects of trauma. We all used it as a fact-finding mission to figure out what the heck happened because we have been ordered not to talk about the incident, not to talk to each other. And it was the first time we were able to see each other in 2 weeks after our shooting. And it was the first time we got to hear other people's perspectives on what they saw and what they did. And so, again, I was the leader in that room. I was the highest ranking person. And I should have been the one to set the example and start opening up and talking about some of this, but also realize some of this is very gradual. It doesn't just all happen immediately.
Right.
The onset of this stuff is gradual. And so at that time, I was having nightmares. I didn't have anyone I can talk to. I started drinking. I was having difficulty sleeping. But in my mind, it was very temporary. I didn't realize it was only going to get worse. But I should have stepped up and just opened that door and said, look, I don't know if this is affecting any of you, but I just want to share how this is really affecting me right now. And who knows? Maybe other people in that room would have opened up and would have shared, and maybe you would have started a whole new discussion. And maybe even I'd be working there today. I mean, I don't want to play the what if game, but I'm telling you, these are mistakes that I made, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I know that dispatcher, I can't remember the exact time frame, but I want to say that she left probably within a year and a half of that incident, and
Wow.
she is no longer a first responder. She no longer works in the business. And they did change the policy that there will never be one dispatcher on duty by themselves because our dispatchers are also call takers. They do the same thing. It's not separate assignment or separate positions. They're doing everything. And so that was one good policy change. And I know there was a subsequent shooting after that where the dispatchers were fully included and were offered all the same resources that the officers were. So I know things have gotten much, much better.
Yeah, I can't imagine the one dispatcher.
I know,
my
that's
gosh.
just like strikes fear in my heart, like being that one dispatcher and then having that happen. And it is like the worst feeling when you don't know, if when you hear shots fired, like, well, who shot and what, and you have no idea and you're just sitting there at the end of the radio. And we talked about this in a previous episode, and I can't remember which one right now, Casey, but we talked about how we didn't think that the law enforcement officers or the firefighters and the medics or whatever, that they don't really get that we feel responsible for them out on the street. Like,
Yes.
it's like a personal mission that you go home for
Yes.
all the dispatchers, right?
Yeah.
And I really think, like you said, Michael, you didn't realize that. And I think that's a big disconnect between dispatch and all the other first responders out there. But we definitely have that feeling. And I also thought when you were talking just then, it reminded me of a place in the book where Doc Springer was talking about sharing. And you just said about, what if I shared? And I remembered, from all of like, when you sit through trauma classes and things like that, you're always, or grief classes, people are always saying, well, don't share your story. Don't, because then people are going to think you're trying to one up them, or, don't share. And she kind of said the exact opposite in the book, which I really do like, because I think you're right. If you start sharing that, then somebody else is more willing to share.
Right.
I agree fully, and especially if you're talking about a supervisor or a position above you. The thing is, if we have a subordinate who goes to their boss and says, "Hey, look, I need help, or can I talk to you?" How are they going to feel that trust and comfort of sharing, personal, vulnerable things if that supervisor is not willing to do the same thing first? And that's where you can really change the culture, is that if you have leaders at all levels who set this example, whether it's in lineup or debriefings or critical incident debriefings, whatever the case may be, where they say, hey, look, you know what, I want to start this off, and I just want to acknowledge how this has affected me, and what I've done to kind of overcome that, or to work on it, these types of things. Because let's face it, if you've been doing this job long enough, we've all been through stuff. We've all had to deal with stuff. And so if you're setting that example to say, look, I was there, you may not believe it, but let me tell you about some things I had to deal with. And let me, more importantly, tell you the resources I used to get better and overcome this. As opposed to what we do now is we want to put up this perfect image and this facade. And I think it gets worse as you move up in rank, to say, like, I'm perfect, my career is perfect, my family's perfect, I don't make mistakes, I don't have feelings. No, no, no. That's bullshit. And people aren't going to go to you, and they're not going to open up, like I said, unless you're willing to do the same yourself. And no different than, let's say we're peer to peer, and let's say I work with you, I'm a fellow dispatcher, and I come into work one day and I can see that you're off. I know something's wrong because I know you. And I ask you, I say, how are you doing? And what do you say? I'm fine,
Fine.
right? That's what we all say. And
Yeah.
I go, cool, because in my mind I'm thinking, I really don't want to know what's going on, right? No, but then I
Right.
take you aside later and say, look, I know you said you're okay, but I really think something's off, and let me open up first, and let me tell you about some things here. And I kind of bridge that gap. You're much more likely now to open up to me because I've opened up to you first. And that's
Right.
why this is so important. And it's never a comparison. And I always see this in my work as a peer volunteer at the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat. It's like, so many people are actually, I mean, there's multiple reasons why they don't want to share their story. But when I'm talking about in a recovery setting, a retreat for post traumatic stress, they call it, what do they call that? Critical incident envy, where, like, you feel like, your story, your incident is like nothing, right? Because we all feel that way. And now you've
Mm-hmm.
heard somebody next to you tell this horrific story that you couldn't even imagine. And so you're telling yourself, why am I even complaining? Like, I couldn't
Right.
even imagine what they went through. So I'm just going to shut my mouth. I'm not going to say anything, because now it looks like I'm whining, or I just can't deal with it. And it's like, no, no, no. We all deal with things differently. Everything affects us differently. And our breaking point, our tipping point, is not always the obvious event. It's not always the most horrific event. It can be anything. And it has to do with our childhood. It has to do with our work experiences, our family life. There's so many factors that go into what's going to be our trigger point, what's going to be our breaking point. And so we should never compare. It's never a contest. It just isn't.
Right. And I think when you've been through a lot of, or enough critical incidents, or even just enough years on the job, like, you understand that everybody processes things differently and everybody sees things differently. And I think even, in the comm center as well, the last comm center that I worked in, we were all in the same room, police, fire, rescue, dispatch, we all did it all. We typically had assignments, but, you know, when the shit hit the fan, you did whatever you needed to do to help out. So we were all pretty much cross trained. And, sometimes you just get a different perspective when you're on a different radio, right? And so, yeah, I think when you've been in it long enough, like you're not trying to one up, you're just trying to share and say, hey, this happened to me too. Or I felt this way too. And I think that's really helpful. And I think we should do a better job of watching out for each other like that. For
Agreed. It
sure.
should
For
it
sure.
should be a normal conversation. That's the thing is, if we get to the point where it's just normal talking about this stuff and decompressing, I think that we can get through a full career and come out healthy on the other side. And chances are, and I mean, I know the therapists and the clinicians don't want to hear this, but if we actually changed our culture and made it to where, we could actually rely on the people to our left and our right and fully just be able to open up to them and know that it's private, it's trusted, it's not going to affect our career, I think that we wouldn't need the therapists and the counselors. But
Right.
when you do what I did and you just bottle it up for so many years, it's then you need them. I mean, you need peers as well. There's you need a combination approach of things to get you better. But I'm saying let's prevent all of that. Let's be proactive and let's just change the culture and normalize these discussions when they're needed.
Yeah, I agree. And you stated in the book that you felt uncomfortable filling your wife in on at the time on what really happened, and you didn't want her to take on the fear. And you just told us that you didn't have a great relationship at the time. And I've actually been on the receiving end of this myself. My ex-husband was a combat veteran in the Middle East after 9/11. And I had no idea how to handle it. Like, I knew something wasn't right, which I'm sure your ex-wife was in the same situation, but I didn't know what, and I certainly didn't know what to do about it. And it wasn't until the marriage was basically irreparable and our what was supposed to be couples counseling turned into my own counseling that the therapist actually started to help me see what was happening. So I'm of the mind now that we need to do a much better job of educating family members and spouses of the first responders because they see us all the time. My husband and I are both in the field, but not everybody is like that. And so if we do a better job of letting the families and the spouses and just supporting them and letting them know these are things that you should look for and this is how you can help, and you can come to us, you can come to a supervisor or peer support and say, hey, I think my husband or my wife is suffering, can you help me? But I don't think we do a very good job of that right now.
I agree 100%. And for me personally, I made a mistake day one in the police academy where I told myself I would never bring work home. I would
Hmm.
never talk about the job because I thought I was protecting my family. And really, and I'm not advocating sharing gruesome details, but what I am saying is that, when we come home pissed off in a bad mood because of the horrific things we saw that day and our families walking around on eggshells, we need to communicate and we need to say, hey, look, you know what? I've had a really rough day today. I need to decompress for like an hour. I'm going to go for a run, whatever. I'm going to go for meditate. I'm going to take a shower. I'm going to go read a book, whatever it is we do to decompress and say, then I'll come back. We can sit down. We can talk about it. And again, not sharing details, but just say, look, I went to this horrible car accident today and it just really affected me. I saw this young child in the back seat and it's not you, it's me, because our family automatically thinks it's them. So when they're
Right.
walking around
Yes.
eggshells, that's why they're like, okay, I don't want to piss them off more. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And so I'm just going to give them their space. But then again, there's no communication. There's no getting this stuff off your chest. And that's where I messed up because if I would have formed that healthy communication in the very beginning, when my shooting happened, I could have talked to her about this stuff and she could have helped me
Hmm.
through it. But actually, similar to what you said, is that when I finally decided to open up to her and ask for her help, our relationship was already done. She was already so far detached. And like you said, she didn't know how to deal with it, how to talk to me about it. And that's because, a couple things. I mean, obviously, I said my part in that, but no one from the agency told her about how it's going to be a first responder spouse. No one educated her on this. No one told her about resources that she could seek out, not only for me, but for her. And that's where, this book is a start for that. I mean, what's so
Yeah.
cool is I've heard this time and time again. So typically, either a first responder will get the book or a spouse of one will get the book. They'll read it first. They'll have their partner read it, and they'll actually, for the first time in their relationship, have a discussion about this, because it actually like bridged that gap to say, look at this guy in California. You don't know him, but he's telling your story. Like, I'm reading about you right now, and so I'm understanding because Doc Springer is explaining what's going on. I see now that this is actually normal, given all the abnormal crap you have to deal with. And so it sets that foundation where you're actually getting educated, and you're opening that doorway to say, look, yeah, this is normal. Let's deal with this. There's resources. Let's get some help. I want to help you. I love you. I support you. And it can be done at home. That's the thing too, is like, not only talking about at work, but if you have a strong relationship at home where you can talk about this stuff, that is invaluable. I mean,
Yeah,
that's gonna help you get through it.
Yeah.
definitely. Now, you also,
Definitely.
sorry, you also mentioned in the book that your immediate supervisors were not sympathetic to your case. They actually mocked your emotional state and basically told you to suck it up. This made you take the same mindset with your subordinates. At the end of the book, I liked how Dr. Springer had mentioned the actions of the administration causing the anxiety, the burnout, the mistrust, and even the suicidal thoughts. And we've talked about this several times with our own resident, Dr. Meredith, and we're all trying to reach the first responders. But how do we reach the administration so these things don't happen in the future?
I wish that was an easy answer. I travel all across the country, and I speak all over, and each agency is different and each culture is different, and it really comes down to the leadership. And um, ironically enough, before I published this book, I reached out to a bunch of military law enforcement leaders, and one of them was an acting police chief of a very large agency here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And they actually told me they didn't believe in post-traumatic stress, and they thought that people were faking it. And
Wow.
so, but they agreed to read the book, and I said, no, this is why I want you to read it, because I think it's going to help change your perception, your mindset. And so we were getting all the responses back from people, and suggestions and whatnot. And this person was the only one we were waiting on to publish the book. And so we reach out, and they said they were like halfway done, but they'd be done by the end of the weekend in a couple days. Well, after that, we never heard from them. We sent emails, text messages, called for like weeks. Didn't hear anything, just ghosted us. And that's what I'm saying. This is the reality, is that we have some agency chiefs out there who look at talking about this as a liability, and that it's going to spread like a cancer, and that no one's going to be working, everyone's going to be off. And, let's face it. I mean, people do abuse the system, no different than like a shoulder injury or a
Mm-hmm.
back injury. It happens. But what about the lives that we're costing because leaders don't believe in post traumatic stress? I mean, you want to talk about an issue, you want to talk about, that costing lives. And so the real answer is getting people in leadership positions who care about their people, who know their people, who set that example, that humble example, to say, look, here's my life. Here's what I've been through. Here's how I've overcome that. I'm not perfect. Here's the mistakes I've made. Here's what I've learned from that. Instead of these chiefs that all they can think about is going from, a small agency to the next big agency. And then now I want to go to the next big. That's all they care about, is how many people do I command? What's the largest agency I can work for? But I've actually met, chiefs who have like a 10-person department, and they're the best police chief I've ever met. But I've also met chiefs of very large agencies the same. I mean, they're phenomenal chiefs, and their subordinates, their command staff, are also phenomenal leaders, because it's that culture. They set the culture at the top. And so we've got
Yeah,
to get people in these positions who believe in their people and care about their people.
For sure.
I agree. Yep. Um, It's funny. My dad is a Navy vet, and one of his favorite phrases I will never forget growing up was "shit rolls downhill."
Yes, it does.
Whenever he was talking about his command, it's like shit rolls downhill, and then it's whether it's good or bad, it's all coming downhill, right? Um, so, do you think, and you talked about a little bit earlier, that you were getting the help, you were moving through, you thought, the process, and then all of a sudden it wasn't quick enough for the head shed, and they were sort of on the fast track to get rid of you. But then I think they tried to kind of segue that by a disciplinary action. Do you think that that sudden action was actually coming from within your department, or do you think it was actually coming from like the human resources side of it?
No, I think it was coming from the department. And the ironic thing is that, at first they were saying, hey, if you agree to retire, we'll make this very easy, painless. And that's where I said, no, I want to get better. I want to come back. But that started a series of events where literally they're trying to, get me in trouble for things that I wasn't even aware of, right? Like policy violations or going outside of the area with my daughter on Father's Day weekend. I mean, just ludicrous stuff.
Right.
And so that's where I got to the point where I said, you know what? I am going to retire. Like I made the decision, like, this is too much. I can't take this. I can't deal with this. I can't do this job anymore. And it was after I made the decision to actually retire, it was a couple weeks after that they dropped an IA, an internal affairs investigation on me for something that supposedly happened over a year and a half earlier. And at that point, I couldn't retire. It actually put
Right.
my retirement in jeopardy, and I was facing potential criminal charges, jail time. I could have lost my entire career, and ended up holding my retirement up for over 8 months after that. I had to hire another lawyer. I had to go through this investigation. I mean, it was absolutely ludicrous. And it's things like that that cause suicide. And even all
Yeah.
that progress I was making, at that point, I actually thought about killing myself when they dropped those charges on me because I said, you know what? Like, I'm fighting for custody of my daughter. I'm not going to have my retirement. I'm not going to be able to have a roof over my head. I'm not going to be able to work. I've got nothing. And thank God I used my resources and I pulled out my cell phone and I called the head peer director where I now volunteer at the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat. And we talked for over 2 hours and he talked me down. He's like, look, you're going to get through this. Let me tell you how. It's going to suck for a while, but you're going to get through it. And he saved my life, again, but it's those things right there that cost lives.
It does
Yeah.
indeed.
Agreed. Wow.
And and don't you just love the no longer employed email? I feel like this is just the icing on top of an administration that promotes the hide and withhold information mindset. Why do you think this is so common?
I think there's a few reasons. You know, I laugh at it now, but I got to tell you, when that email came out, I was so pissed. And
I
I mean, I
guess
that,
can't.
so. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean, that's just like, oh, I mean, talk about bottoming out. Like, first of all, we're trying to get you out. No, never mind. Now we're going to charge you with something. And then now we're going to, totally disrespect you and pretend like you didn't work here for however many years.
well, that's the thing is usually the chief would send out a huge email with like all your assignments, your accomplishments. And let me tell you right now, like I had so many accomplishments. I led every single team I was ever on. I mean, I held all these different positions. I was promoted quicker and faster than anybody at that time. Received a heroic medal for my shooting, saving lives. And literally, like a 1 or 2 line email goes out that made it sound like I just got fired. It's like no longer employed,
Right.
right?
yeah.
So, like, none of that shit mattered. And it was
Yep.
like, and so part of me feels like, honestly, it's shitty assholes who aren't leaders, who are haters. I mean, honestly, like, and they're just glad to see you go and they want to crap on you as much as they can on the way out. You know what I mean? It's just a
Yep.
lack of respect. And the thing is, though, what I've learned is I've kind of reframed this to learn that those are the people that are actually suffering themselves. They don't show it, they don't talk about it, but their personal lives are falling apart. It's in turmoil. And
Mhm.
literally, when they leave the job, they've got nothing. I mean, their identity's gone. They've got nothing. And so I actually pray for those people, and I hope that they get the help that they need because they don't realize the damage and the lives that they're costing. I mean, they are costing lives. And that's the thing is when they retire and they look back in that mirror, how many of them can actually look themselves in the mirror?
Right.
Right. I
And
would
this,
imagine that the number of ghostings that you got after giving your book to people were the same situation. It just struck a nerve. I mean, I think there's a little bit of, yeah, we don't want to sort of have this cascade of people going out, on post traumatic stress leave or, medical or whatever. But we know that that wouldn't actually happen. If it was a supportive community, you would have less of that. And I think, like you said, with the skin cancer diagnosis, like those things, back pain, knee pain, like all of those things can also be signs of stress. And so if you don't have those stressors, then you don't have people that are going out on medical leave all the time. But these people are so entrenched in their beliefs that either this doesn't exist or they're not going to acknowledge it, that they just can't see past, someone like yourself who's trying to get the help that they need and become a better employee. They're just assuming that you're being a shitty employee,
right.
which I think is too bad.
It
It
is.
is. I mean, it's you know, and so like now, that the agency it's probably had like an 80% turnover rate. It's got a new chief who I've never met. He came from another agency. But what's so ironic to me is that I've sent this chief several messages on LinkedIn. I've sent him interviews. I've sent him the links to the book. I've sent him powerful videos. And you would think here's a leader from the outside taking over an organization. He would want to know the history. He would want to know what happens. I haven't even gotten a single response, not even a one word response or a thank you on anything I've sent. And even more ironically, I speak all across the country. I mean, I go to Virginia, I go to Florida, Maine, right? I'm in California, and I would speak for free at that agency, right? I've never been
Right.
asked to talk about it. I've never been asked to come in and speak. And again, we're talking like 80% of that PD, I don't even know them. And it's just like they want to pretend like this never happened. They just want it to disappear and go away. But I think to myself, why wouldn't a leader who takes over an agency spend 5.5 hours to read a book or listen on Audible on something that might help him save lives within his own organization? I
Right.
just don't get it. I don't get it at all.
I don't. I don't either. And all of this, it just unfortunately and completely proves that we're all just a warm body, either in a car riding around responding or sitting in the chair dispatching. Like, I mean, it just proves that you're replaceable. And
But you know
it's
why
Yeah.
that's
it's a
so
real
important?
shame.
And that's why like making your family a priority is so important because your family is what matters. And I screwed that up initially, and I was so worried about my career and the next promotion or the next
Hmm.
assignment, working endless overtime and crappy midnight shifts, trying to get ahead. And none of that mattered, right? Because like you said, we are a warm body filling a chair or a seat or whatever the case may be. And so people that are listening to this now, man, focus on your loved ones, focus on your family. I mean, this is a job. I get that it's a calling, but in the end, your family and loved ones are the ones that are going to be there for you if you take care of them.
Yes, that is 1,000% true.
Indeed. And to do that, you and the doc talked about several different therapies or modalities, and as well as combining them. And since starting this podcast, I've learned of all kinds of new ones that I had never heard of. Can you just tell us a little bit about what modalities or therapies you think work best for you?
Absolutely. And again, what I found is that not everything works for everybody, that it takes a combination approach. And most importantly, you have to have an open mind and be willing to try new things and also not give up when something doesn't work. As an example, so for me, what really worked was first finding a culturally competent clinician, somebody who specialized in first responders, who truly understood us. The second thing was going to first responder support meetings, which I'd never heard of before. And basically, it's just an hour-long discussion meeting. It's confidential. It's not associated with any agency. It's run by volunteers, and it's open to all first responders. I also attended the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat, which is a week-long retreat now all over the U.S., not just in California for first responders. I attended Save a Warrior, which is for both active military, veterans, and all first responders. And that program is for complex post-traumatic stress. It focuses on the childhood trauma, or the ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. Tried medication, mindfulness, meditation, physical fitness therapy, like hiking, going to the gym. Those things are huge for me. But that whole combination, equine therapy, but as an example, so EMDR, I've seen it work for countless people. I mean, they use it at the retreat I go to. I know I've seen it actually happen in front of me, but for me, EMDR doesn't work. And that's my point, is to know that, again, it works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everybody. So I didn't give up. I didn't go, you know what, I'm doomed. I said, okay, that doesn't work. Let me try this over here. And so that's why you got to keep this open mind. And then what I also did was the stellate ganglion block, which we talk about in detail in the book. It's a medical procedure. It doesn't cure post-traumatic stress. It just treats the physical symptoms, that fight or flight, those feelings or reactions that the amygdala, the primitive part of the human brain, causes. And we talk about that in full detail in the book. And that's Doc Springer's expertise. I mean, that's what she does now. She works with Stella, based out of Chicago, and they train doctors, not just in the US, but Australia, all over the world, on how to do this procedure. And it's very effective. It works for like 85% of the people. And again, it doesn't cure post-traumatic stress. It puts you in a place physically to where you can do these other things like therapy, retreats, equine therapy, EMDR, all these other dualities. So, yeah. And then there's things I do now to maintain. I still see a therapist, not every week, but every 2 weeks I talk to a therapist. I go to the gym every single day. I usually work out with either my veteran buddy or my law enforcement buddy. So I actually have like that talk therapy while we're working out. Occasionally I go to those meetings. I don't go every week like I used to. I maybe go like once a month now. I practice gratitude every single night before I go to bed. I think of 3 positive things that happened during the day. And it could be anything. It could be like, I got up out of bed today with no back pain, or I
Right.
went to lunch with my brother. I had dinner at my mom's house. And that way you're ending the day with positive thoughts in your brain to help lessen the likelihood of nightmares, night terrors, and you wake up more positive and refreshed the next day. So even though I consider myself on the other side of this, there's things I have to do, I know, to maintain it. No different than you have to maintain your physical fitness. There are things that you have to do to maintain your mental fitness.
All right, Michael, we thank you so much for joining us. Now, I have one last question for you before we let you go. What is the message that you want to spread to the world?
So my message is this: if you're listening to this and you think that you're the only one, you're suffering in silence, your life is falling apart, and you really think that there's nobody out there that's going to get it, nobody out there is going to understand it. That's how I felt, and I was wrong. It turns out that there's endless resources out there. It also turns out that there's countless brothers and sisters out there who will get it, who will be there to support you and pick up the pieces. I was so ashamed and afraid to ask for help. Even 2 years into my recovery, I was still ashamed and embarrassed to talk about the things I had to go through and the feelings I was having. But now that I'm on the other side of this, I know today, sitting here, that asking for help was the strongest, bravest thing I've ever done in my life. It was nothing I did in the military. It was nothing I did on the streets as a law enforcement officer. It wasn't even that shooting. It was me raising my hand and asking for that help. And had I not done that, I wouldn't be here today. And so all I ask is that if you are suffering, please reach out, ask for that help. There's endless resources. You can start with confidential text lines and hotlines, which are staffed by first responders, culturally competent clinicians. They don't have to know your name. They don't have to know your agency. You can call or text 24/7 in the privacy of your home, the privacy of your patrol car, wherever you are. But start somewhere.
That is an awesome message. And I
Yes,
hope
indeed.
that it reaches a lot of people, because that is our goal too, is to save more lives and save more careers too, because it is a calling for a lot of people. And with the rate of people leaving the first responder world, there need to be more of us staying in it longer. Thank you so much for being with us. We enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And I'm on every single social media platform out there. So if people want to reach out to me, I check my messages daily. I will get back to you. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Truth, Parlor. I mean, you name it,
Oh my
I'm on it.
gosh.
Yeah, just type in Sergeant Michael Sugrue, and I'll tell you this: if you do read or listen to Relentless Courage, I want to hear from you, because I'm going to tell you right now, once you start this, you won't be able to stop, and this book
Yes.
will change your life, absolutely change your life. So reach out. I love to hear your thoughts, and I promise you, I will get back to you.
Yes, it is a great book.
It is a great book. We'll link it in our show notes. And thank you,
Yeah.
Michael, again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Till next time, y'all. Bye.
All right. Bye.